Chapter 30:11. Guzé narrowed his eyes and stared at the little wild cat. "Why did you bite me?" He didn't know why his voice was so hoarse. It was tainted with a desire that shouldn't be there. The little fool lay helplessly in his arms. He was wearing a black shirt of good quality. It was cold and very comfortable. That little fool rubbed herself against his body with all her might, which also made Guzé angry that he shouldn't have. His voice was extremely low as he said, "Don't move anymore." "I'm moving." The little fellow didn't stop. Instead, she desperately rubbed herself against him. Guzé's expression changed greatly, and a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. He pressed his hands on her waist, trying to stop her. She had no idea what she was doing to him at this moment. They were making love through their clothes. He clearly wanted to stop her, but his hands seemed to have magic. They kept pressing her back and forth. He was enjoying it while feeling guilty. He felt that it was no different from rape. When these two words appeared in Yuang's mind, everything came to a halt. There was only the sound of decadent breathing and his guilt. He thought, if she wasn't a little fool and was extremely smart, would he still touch her? He wouldn't. He would keep his distance from her. In other words, psychologically, he was no different from those men. He would also bully her. Guzé suddenly leaned against the back of the chair, gasping for breath. Lin Cece helplessly lay in his arms, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what was wrong with him. They were fine just now. She tried to kiss him again. Her soft little body lay in his arms, and her little lips gently touched his neck, bit by bit, as if she was self-taught. Guzé turned his face away and didn't let her touch him. She was a little hurt, but she stubbornly kissed him again. "Cece." He finally stopped her. He held her little arm and pulled her body over. "We can't do this." She looked hurt. "Why? You were like this just now." Guzé didn't know how to explain to her, but he had to tell her no matter how difficult it was. He stopped the car by the roadside and carried her to the back seat. He held her like a child and helped her put on her clothes. Lin Cece didn't move. She just stared at him blankly. "You haven't said why." Guzé put on her clothes and sighed, "Cece, we are not boyfriend and girlfriend. This kind of thing can only be done between a boyfriend and girlfriend or husband and wife." Lin Cece's little face was a little pale. After a long time, she asked softly, "Then, what is our relationship?" Guzé thought for a moment before saying, "I know him." Although the little fool had drunk too much, and although she was stupid, she had a feeling that this was a very strange relationship. Because his attitude was very cold. She didn't understand why he seemed so excited to play an interesting game with her just now, but now he was unwilling. So she bit her lips. "Do you hate me?" Guzé sighed softly. "How could that be? Then why won't you let me kiss you?" The little fool said very honestly. "I just want to kiss you, so I like you." Guzé's heart was a little sour. She didn't know what it meant to like someone. But in his heart, he was still a little happy because she liked him. Chapter 30:12. "I don't want to." Her voice was soft, and she looked at him carefully. "Finally, she told the truth, because I went to Lan Yu's house," the beautiful sister left in anger. Guzé was surprised, but he also felt that it was reasonable. If he were Qin Chen, he would also leave. Calmly looking at the little person, he asked seriously, "Is this the reason why you came to find me?" The little fool nodded, "Yes, that's the main reason." Another reason was that she wanted to eat him. Guzé thought about it and felt that he should just treat it as a good deed. Besides, the little fool was quite sad just now, so he just needed to comfort her. After a day or two, he would throw her to Lan Yu and let him solve it himself. Anyway, he brought the little fool back from abroad. Although he liked her, he didn't want to be a nanny. But Guzé didn't expect that Lin Cece was like a piece of dog skin plaster. Once stuck, he couldn't take it away. He started the car again and took the little fool to the high-end villa area where he lived. The villa was mainly black and white, and the decoration was very fancy. But the little fool didn't know how to appreciate it. She felt that it was cold and not beautiful at all. But she could also see that it was very expensive. "Is this also Lan Yu's house?" the little fool asked. Guzé thought that this was a project developed by Lan Yu's company, so it could be considered as Lan Yu's house. So he lied with a white lie, yes. He said this to relieve her nervousness, but he didn't expect that the little fool actually nodded understandingly. "If it's Lan Yu, then I'll sleep in the master bedroom." After that, she stretched her body and went upstairs. Guzé didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Who said she was a little fool? She was very smart. He let her be. At most, she would just soak in his bathtub. He went to the bar and poured himself a glass of wine. Now he could enjoy and relax. Before drinking, he gently swirled the glass and smiled. He was quite satisfied because he brought back a troublemaker. But just as he took a sip, a scream came from upstairs. Guzé frowned slightly. He immediately put down his cup and went upstairs. Lin Cece stood in his bedroom and pointed at a fairy on the bed. Who is she? The seductress didn't have anything on her. She just lay naked in the blanket. Guzé understood a bit and said helplessly, "Get out." It must have been arranged by his secretary. In the past 2 years, he would occasionally relax, but not often. About once or twice every 6 months. He tried to recall what he had said today that caused the secretary to misunderstand and arrange for this stunner to be with him. Thinking of Lin Cece's reaction, he rubbed his forehead and felt a headache coming on. The beautiful woman was unwilling to give up. She glared at Lin Cece and asked, "Who are you?" The little fool immediately hugged onto Guzé's arm. "He's my father." Guzé was annoyed and amused at the same time. He looked at the person in his arms and then looked at the beautiful woman. He really couldn't raise his interest. Hence, he said coldly, "Get dressed and get out." The beautiful woman was very sad. Then, she glared at Lin Cece and realized that she was missing a finger. She snorted softly. "Mr. Gu actually likes a cripple." Guzé's face changed completely. He stared at the woman and smiled faintly. "What's your name?" The woman thought that he had changed his mind and hurriedly told him her name. Guzé remembered it. He would make sure that she didn't even have the right to be a prostitute. He didn't know why he couldn't tolerate others calling him a little fool. Perhaps it was because she had called him father. Chapter 13. After the woman said the name, she thought that this little fool was always messing up her plans. President Gu's secretary had asked her to come. Although it was 100,000 each time, President Gu was such a young and handsome man. Which woman wouldn't want to get involved with him? Even if she couldn't help him, she could open a side business and raise him outside. Then she wouldn't have to work so hard to earn money. Wishful thinking, the woman immediately came down and wanted to pull Lin Cece over. Lin Cece buried her face in Guzé's arms and looked at the woman eagerly. Guzé said coldly, "Get out." The woman was stunned. She had a bit of a reputation in the industry. Although she was an unlicensed model, she wasn't bad in all aspects. No man had ever seen her naked and had a cold expression on his face. But President Gu had actually treated her so harshly because of a little fool. She was so angry. However, the woman didn't dare to offend Guzé, so she put on her clothes and left. When she left, she glared at Lin Cece. The little fool shivered. Will she do something to me? Guzé looked at her meaningfully. Probably. The little fool looked at him and said, "Will you protect me?" Guzé smiled and patted her head. "That depends on whether you're good or not." The little fool burst into tears. She stared at him for a long time and said, "You're not good. I don't want to like you anymore." Guzé's heart softened. He stared at her and said, "Do you like me?" She nodded and said, "Because you took me to eat skewers." Then she hugged his arm and said, "But you don't like me. Look at how you have a vixen on your bed." She let go of him angrily. "Have you ever kissed a vixen?" Hugged. Guzé laughed involuntarily and sat on a sofa in front of the French window. It was a very adult topic, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to talk to a little fool. Moreover, they had almost lost control of their guns in the car. Guzé thought for a while before he slowly said, "I've never done it with her." He admitted that he was avoiding the important points and dwelling on the trivial ones. He wasn't trying to seduce her on purpose, but it was a man's instinct. But at this moment, the little fool was not stupid at all. She looked at him eagerly and asked seriously, "Then tell me, have you ever kissed anyone?" Guzé lit a cigarette, and the butt almost burned himself. He quietly looked at the little thing and softly said, "I have. After all, I'm already over 30 years old." If he hadn't done it, then he would be the one with a physiological problem, all right? The reason why he didn't have sex for 8 years was because he fell in love with a girl. Guzé's feelings for her were deeply engraved in his heart. Although it was one-sided, he couldn't say that he had completely forgotten it after seeing Qin Mu. He could only say that he had given up. He was a little startled and took a puff of his cigarette. Lin Cece stared at him eagerly for a long time before running over. Then, she threw herself into his arms. Guzé's voice was a little hoarse. "What's going on?" Lin Cece shook her head and buried her face in his arms. After a while, she whispered, "Have you ever liked a girl? The kind that you like a lot?" Guzé smiled and said, "Yes, she's very good. She must be very smart, right?" The little fool pouted and tears rolled down her cheeks. Guzé reached out and touched her head. "Yes. Then she must be very beautiful, right?" The little fool was not going to let him go. Chapter 30:14. The silly girl was stunned. She looked at him for a long time before asking what she wanted to ask the most. "Have you hugged her before?" Her gaze drifted to the bed. "Have you ever rolled around on it?" This time, Guzé couldn't help but laugh. "Why do you have so many questions?" However, he still reached out and caressed her little head. "No. She has only liked one man from the beginning. She has never liked me before." He thought that he had the chance before. However, his heart softened. He let her go. There was no point in forcing it. He didn't lose to Zhou Chongguang, but to Qin Mu herself. It was Qin Mu who couldn't let go, so he lost. While Guzé was in a daze, the little fool was once again stunned. "She doesn't like you because you rolled around with someone else." She blinked innocently. Guzé couldn't help but laugh. Although he wasn't a very clean man, he was considered a clean man. At least, compared to Zhou Chongguang, he was much more restrained. However, some liking was just liking. It couldn't be changed. He pursed his lips and said calmly, "All right, it's getting late. It's time to sleep." At this moment, he realized something. The silly girl seemed to be very sober. The drunkenness she had shown in the car was most likely an act. Actually, she wasn't silly at all. However, Guzé didn't expose her. He wanted to save some face for the silly girl, right? He got up. "Sleep early. I'll go to the guest room. Call me if you need anything." He had only taken 2 steps when she grabbed his hand. He turned back. "What's wrong?" "That vixen slept on this place." "I don't want to sleep here," Lin Cece said softly. Guzé smiled. "Then I'll sleep here and you can sleep in the guest room." She was still unwilling to let go of his hand. Guzé was a little helpless and took 2 steps back. "Cece. Change the bed sheets," she said in a delicate voice. Guzé could only give in. "Will you sleep if I change them?" She nodded. Therefore, Guzé was like an old maid, changing the bed sheets for her. After changing, she lay on the bed and hummed comfortably. So comfortable. In the summer, she was wearing a skirt again. At this time, the bottom of her skirt was lifted. Guzé's whole body suddenly heated up. The fire that hadn't been aroused by the woman's lack of clothes just now suddenly rose. It wouldn't be a good feeling. His Adam's apple bobbed twice, and then he walked out the door. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room." When he returned to the guest room, he immediately took off his shirt and went to take a shower. He needed a cold shower. However, his body that had not been relaxed for a long time was so uncomfortable. How could a cold shower solve it? Outside, thunder had begun to rumble and the wind was howling. A man's groan of pleasure could be heard from the bathroom. Just then, a clap of thunder sounded, followed by a scream, followed by the bathroom door being pulled open. A little person threw herself into his arms. Guzé suddenly, there was nothing left. He looked up and closed his eyes slightly. He gritted his teeth and said, "Lin Cece." However, the little fool didn't know what was wrong with him. She kept hugging him, her body trembling. "It's thunder. I'm so scared." He was a man without clothes. Didn't she know how to be scared? Guzé narrowed his eyes and let out a long sigh. "You go out first." He had to clean up. However, that little fool had finally hugged him. How could he bear to leave? Besides, she was really scared. Her little body rubbed against him, which aroused Guzé's interest again. He shouted awkwardly, "Leave now if you don't want me to take advantage of you." Chapter 30:15. However, the little fool was still looking at him adorably. She didn't know what it meant to take advantage of him. She just stared at him, curiosity written all over her little face. Guzé's patience came to an end. As a man who had been abstinent for a long time, he wouldn't be human if he could still be a gentleman after being aroused by her again and again tonight. He lowered his head and kissed her little mouth, swallowing her scream. Then, he explained what it meant to be a beast in human clothing. He was such a refined man, but when he did such a thing, he was extremely rough. And there was no technique. Lin Cece's memory was blank regarding the matter of sex. Her back was against the smooth and cold wall, and she was shivering from the cold. At first, she could barely follow his rhythm and kiss him back, but after a while, the skin on her back was almost peeled off. Moreover, it was very cold. Thus, as she shivered and pushed him away, Guzé came back to his senses. He hugged her and kissed her from her beautiful neck to her ears. He said hoarsely, "You don't want to." He leaned against her neck for a while and wanted to leave. But in the next second, he was hugged. The little fool buried her face in his arms and said softly, I want to." She said it was cold, but her body was so hot that it was a fatal temptation for men. Guzé's dark eyes were filled with a storm. He narrowed his eyes and said, "You won't regret it." Because he didn't intend to take responsibility. This night was just an accident. He knew very well that he had no emotional resonance with the little fool, and he didn't have the patience to take care of her for the rest of his life, but he was afraid that she didn't know. Lin Cece's expression was very complicated at that moment. Her eyes were filled with tears as she looked at him. That expression made his heart ache. He almost gave up and wanted to step back and leave her. But the little fool hugged him tightly again. Her voice was very soft. "Guzay, I do." With that, she started crying. Even a little fool knew what the man meant when he asked if she was willing at this time. If he was going to take responsibility, he wouldn't have asked. It was because it was just a night of pleasure that he needed to ask. The little fool was really sad. How could Guzay carry on with her crying in his arms? As he hugged her and coaxed her gently, he couldn't help but start to burn again. Then the hot water was turned on, and she was pressed against the warm wall, allowing him to enjoy himself to the fullest. She was petite but soft. Guzay kissed her and whispered into her ear, "Cece, are you happy?" Lin Cece closed her eyes slightly and said softly, "Happy." His voice trembled with unspeakable joy. That night, she was extremely gentle. She didn't seem like a little fool at all, and the energy that he had accumulated for so long was like a volcano erupting. Because it was a night of pleasure, it seemed especially restrained. After one session, he carried her to the big bed, turned off the light, and made love to her in the moonlight. Their fingers clasped tightly together. He could also feel her missing finger. His heart ached a little, so he became gentler. He called her Cece and kissed her gently, lingering under the moonlight again and again. At that moment, she was complete again. Later on, she kept crying and clamoring for it to end. Chapter 30:16. The little fool hugged him. Perhaps she really liked him, or perhaps she couldn't bear to see him in so much pain, so she didn't make a sound. Seeing her like this made Guzay's heart ache even more. After 3 times, he flipped to the side and calmed down, turning his face to look at the little fellow. She had actually fallen asleep, probably because she was too tired. Guzay's gaze became a little complicated. He regretted it. Actually, it wasn't a big deal for him to have sex with a woman. Everyone was willing, but when it was Cece, he regretted it. He didn't even know how he was going to face her tomorrow. Guzay had never been so timid before. At that time in the bathroom, he had been so impatient. He admitted that he had been impulsive. Guzay lay down and closed his eyes. In the end, he still got up to help her clean up. Then, he didn't feel sleepy anymore. He put on a bathrobe and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window to smoke. Late at night, Lin Cece choked and woke up. Opening her tired eyes, she saw Guzay's back as he stood by the window. She looked at him quietly. He seemed to be very distressed and in a difficult position. The little fool thought a lot and thought about the woman his secretary had found for him. That kind of woman only needed to be paid, right? She pursed her lips. If that could make him feel better, she would be willing to do it. She laughed softly, walked carefully behind him, and hugged him from behind. "Guzay, will you give me the money?" she said in a low voice, and then raised her eyes to look at him. Guzay's body froze. He almost couldn't believe what he had heard. After a moment, he whispered, "Cece." The little fool's face was buried in his back, and her voice was very soft. "Guzay, give me the money, and we'll pretend that today never happened." She walked to his front, lowered her eyes at first, then raised her little face to look at him. She pursed her lips and said softly, "I don't want you to be sad and in a difficult position." Guzay lowered his eyes, looked at the little fool in front of him, and suddenly hugged her in his arms. He bent down and pressed his face against her neck. He hugged her just like that. She was naked in his arms, and she looked so silly. He felt like he was hugging a baby in his arms. After a long time, he suppressed his voice and said, "Cece, let me think about it." Lin Cece looked at him, her eyes sparkling with hope. She liked him, he thought. However, He didn't like her, but he slept with her. He could not give her an immediate answer. She did not want it, but he could not stop thinking. He reached out and gently carried her back to the bed and put her under the quilt. Guzay bent his knees and said in a hoarse voice, "Are you hungry? I'll go get some food for you." Lin Cece shook her head. "I'm not hungry." He smiled faintly and sat beside her, gently coaxing her to sleep. Lin Cece rested her chin on his shoulder and said softly, "Guzay, don't make things difficult for me, okay?" Guzay nodded. "I'm not making things difficult for you." The little fool lay in his arms and said softly, "I only want to be with you. I don't like to face so many people." If Guzay had not made up his mind before, he could not avoid it now that she said it. He could not get married, but his wife could not be as pure as Cece. Guzay's heart was a little wet. He reached out and stroked her hair, pressing her face into his arms. He said softly, "I understand." Chapter 30:17. Early in the morning, Guzay was woken up by her shaking him. "Guzay, I'm hungry." The little fool was sitting on him. She didn't feel that she was as smooth as Eve, and it was early in the morning. Men couldn't stand being teased like this in the morning, let alone when she was rubbing against him like this. Guzay closed his eyes slightly. "Cece." The little fool lay in his arms and whispered, "If you don't cook for me, I'll eat you." She didn't know how provocative these words were for a man. Guzay opened his eyes and said sternly, "Cece, come down." She was still afraid of him. She obediently came down and pouted. "Then you cook for me." Guzay stared at her for a long time. She didn't keep what happened last night in her heart. Sure enough, she wasn't suitable to appear in public. He sat up and wiped his face. After a long time, he said, "Go wash your face. I have something to tell you later." The little fool looked at him eagerly. "Can we eat first?" She touched her belly again. "I'm really hungry. You kept pushing me to come last night. I said no, but you insisted." "Guzay, aren't you hungry? I saw you sweating a lot." Guzay held back and lifted the quilt. "Let's go downstairs in 10 minutes. The little fool looked at him eagerly. He seemed to be angry, but she didn't know why he was angry. She put on her bathrobe and ran into the bathroom to brush her teeth. She looked at him fawningly as she brushed her teeth. Guzay was annoyed and amused at the same time. He felt warm in his heart. He was wearing good clothes, but he couldn't help but pat her little head. She rubbed against him like a kitten. He smiled and kissed her forehead. "I'll be down in a while." "Ha! Don't sleep in." She looked at him while brushing her teeth. Her eyes were like grapes, very cute. Guzay smiled faintly and walked downstairs. It took him 10 minutes to make breakfast. Lin Cece came down. The only thing on her body was his black shirt. Guzay's eyes darkened. There's nothing in it because I don't have any clothes to wear." She said pitifully, "You'll buy it for me, won't you?" Guzay closed his eyes. "I'll buy it for you later." "I'm going with you," she said matter-of-factly. Guzay's gaze became a little distant as it locked onto her. Lin Cece looked at him eagerly. "Is there a problem?" He closed his eyes slightly. "No." She didn't even ask his decision. She was really stupid, so stupid that he couldn't bear to let her go. He thought that he would call Lanyu and tell him that he wanted to take care of Cece. Cece's health wasn't good, so he set up a sanatorium for her and hired a bunch of people to take care of her. However, at this time, Guzay did not think that what he did was not better than what Lanyu did. On the contrary, he had more emotional attachments, and she would be even more unhappy. He also didn't think that he shouldn't touch her if he didn't want to give up. Because she was a little fool. She didn't understand a lot of things, but he understood everything she didn't understand. Lin Cece ate the breakfast he made contentedly, happily swinging her little feet. She felt extremely happy. Because this was a normal life. She had longed for it for a long time. So she was very happy, and she was with Guze. She was smiling and wasn't worried at all. Chapter 30:18. He patted her head and said softly, "Eat more if you like it." The silly girl smiled. Okay. She finished the breakfast he had prepared and even licked a CD. Guze didn't have any objections to her animal-like lifestyle, but he knew that she couldn't walk in front of people. President Gu didn't think that he would allow her to do this in the future. After licking the CD, the silly girl looked at him and said, "Guze, what do you want to tell me?" Guze was deep in thought. She seemed to have forgotten what had happened last night, or perhaps she had automatically filtered it out and pretended to forget. She didn't want to put him in a difficult position. He smiled lightly and said slowly, "I'll call on you and tell him that I'll take care of you." "What do you mean by taking care of me?" The silly girl tilted her head and asked him seriously. Guze's voice became gentler. "I'll prepare a house for you with professional doctors and nurses." "Is it a nursing home?" Lin Cece asked him softly. But she liked the old nursing home. If that was the case, she would rather stay at the old place. Guze shook his head. "No, it's home, Cece's home." "Will you live there?" Lin Cece asked softly. Guze nodded. "I'll go over on the weekend." Lin Cece's face suddenly turned red. "Will we sleep together?" He nodded and said, "We'll sleep together." "Cece, let's get our marriage certificate." Marriage certificate? She didn't know what marriage certificate was. Lin Cece tilted her head and looked curious. Guze didn't explain. She wouldn't understand anyway. But he didn't expect that one day, the silly girl would understand. She would know everything. Including him and her, this unreasonable marriage, and his unreasonable arrangement. She would know that his arrangement for her was no different from that of an unmarried woman. And he didn't love her. He just pitied her and liked her a little because they had slept together once. She would know more in the future, but she knew nothing now. She looked at him with sparkling eyes, knowing only that he would live with her and sleep with her. But she didn't know that 2 days a week together would come at the cost of 5 days of waiting. She knew nothing and was being treated unfairly. She happily agreed, changed into one of his tracksuits, and went out shopping with him in the mall. After a while, Guze's phone rang. It was Lan Yu. He picked it up and seemed to know who Lan Yu was looking for. He said calmly, "Cece is with me." Lan Yu stood not far away from them with his phone in hand. Lin Cece's phone had a location, so Lan Yu found her. He looked at Lin Cece's clothes and instantly understood. He walked over quickly and grabbed Guze's collar. "Did you touch her?" Guze didn't deny it. "Yes." The veins on Lan Yu's face popped. Without thinking, he punched Guze's face. What followed was Lan Yu's angry roar. "She's already like this and you still treat her like this. What's the difference between you and those beasts?" Guze took a few steps back and finally steadied himself. He wiped the blood from his lips and stared at Lan Yu. "I will take responsibility. You can marry her." Lan Yu's eyes were cold, like a father who found out his daughter had slept with someone else. Chapter 30:19. Guze's voice was firm. "I can marry her." "Are you crazy? Do you know what this means?" "It means that Cece will have to face everything again and face those bastards." She's living a good and happy life now, do you know that? Lan Yu untied his tie, looking very annoyed. She's a little bored now, but that's normal. You're just a little feeling when she's bored. Lan Yu looked at Guzhe and hit the nail on the head. You know who she used to like. It was Qin Chen. Guzhe didn't feel anything in his heart. He looked at Lin Sisi, who was hiding at the side. Her expression was very innocent, and she shook her head, meaning that she liked him. But Lan Yu was in a rage. He stared at Guzhe. You want her to deal with those social interactions with you. You know that she's as innocent as a child. As Guzhe spoke, he grabbed Lin Sisi's arm and asked softly, Are you going to be with him or go home with me? Lin Sisi looked at him carefully, her expression timid. After a while, she carefully broke away from his hand and lowered her eyes. I want to be with him. Are you crazy? Lan Yu's gaze was cold. It's only been one night, and you've already thought it through. Lin Sisi was afraid of him. She was afraid that he would be angry, so she pursed her lips and hugged him. He pushed her away because he was angry at her, but she stuck to him and hugged him again. Lan Yu. I really like him. The little fool looked at him eagerly. I promise, if I'm not happy, I'll come back, okay? There was a hint of warmth in Lan Yu's eyes. He tried his best to suppress himself. What Guzhe saw was a good Sisi. Although she was a little silly, she was good. Only he had seen her broken state and the most desperate moment of her life. At that time, he had thought that he would protect her for the rest of his life. However, he had never thought that she would fall in love with Guzhe. They had seen each other twice, alone together twice. Just together. Together forever. Lan Yu raised her head slightly and said in a low voice, What if you want to turn back and I don't want you? Are you still going to be with him? Lin Sisi's face was slightly hurt. As far as she was concerned, Lan Yu was her family. Would he be so angry that he didn't want her? She forgot to breathe and just stared at him. After a while, she looked at Guzhe pitifully. Guzhe, what about you? Will you abandon me? I won't. Guzhe smiled. However, he knew very well what kind of desire it was, but Lin Sisi did not understand. Lin Sisi pursed her lips and looked at Lan Yu. She said carefully, He said he wouldn't abandon me. Lan Yu's face was ashen. He straightened his body slightly. One day, you will cry. After that, he turned around. Guzhe, if you dare to bully her, I won't let you off. With that, he left in a straight line. He left just like that. Lin Sisi looked at him, hurt on her little face. Guzhe reached out and pulled her into his arms. His voice was gentle. Didn't you want to buy clothes? But his little fool was no longer in the mood. She cared about Lan Yu. Now that Lan Yu was angry, she was not in the mood at all. It turned out that she also had good and bad moods. Guzhe thought to himself. At this time, he did not realize that he had accepted Lin Sisi and made such an arrangement because he was lonely. Lan Yu could see it clearly, so he did not agree. But what could he do? Chapter 30-20. After Lan Yu went back, he was depressed for a few days. He felt guilty towards Lin Sisi. If he hadn't introduced Guzhe to her, Sisi might have stayed in that nursing home for the rest of her life. She might have been bored and she might have gotten into trouble from time to time, but she would have been fine for the rest of her life and wouldn't have been hurt again. He received a message from Guzhe saying that Lin Sisi had been settled down and they had gotten their marriage certificate. Lan Yu sneered, marriage certificate. Guzhe, getting married is the same as having a mistress. How dare you say that you've gotten your marriage certificate? But after saying that, he thought of himself and didn't say anything else. After hanging up, he quietly thought about it. He knew that Lin Cece's parents had agreed. Who wouldn't agree? Guze was rich and good-looking. Anyone would agree if such a man was willing to marry someone like Cece. But Lan Yu didn't think highly of it. He would rather Cece be simple and only know simple things for the rest of her life. He closed his eyes and quietly stayed alone in the darkness. As for his wife in name, he hadn't seen her for a week. He had been delayed because of Cece's matter. Later, probably to vent his anger, he didn't look for her and she didn't come back either. She probably thought that Cece was still living here. He thought that there was really no need to explain. He hated her. He hated a person. He didn't need to explain or coax. The days passed just like that. He didn't know how long it had been. It was probably about a month. He saw Chin Chin. It was in a very famous Western restaurant. He saw her eating with a man. Her expression was indifferent, but the man's eyes were filled with admiration. Kevin, who was next to Lan Yu, looked at the boss's expression and felt a little green. He coughed lightly and said, "Boss, shall we sit there? I've made a reservation." Lan Yu turned sideways and said, "Cancel the dinner with Mr. Zhang and help me arrange another time." Kevin didn't say anything. Lan Yu's gaze was fixed on that table. The man's hand was almost holding Chin Chen's. He sneered, "Just say that my wife is going to have an affair." Kevin held back his laughter. "That's a good enough reason. I think Mr. Zhang will understand and sympathize with us." Lan Yu frowned. "Are you mocking me?" Kevin shrugged. "It's obvious, isn't it?" Lan Yu's face darkened. Kevin said, "I'm not the one who made you a cuckold." However, he did not dare to do too much. He immediately dialed CEO Zhang's number and settled the matter. After hanging up the phone, he saw that his CEO Lan had already walked over and was staring at the man and woman at the opposite table with an unfriendly gaze. Kevin walked over and went to greet Chin Chin. "Madam." Chin Chen was stunned. The person sitting across from her was the CEO of Magnificent Tang Company, who intended to invite her to shoot an urban movie. It was a favor for Sister Quan, and she was still considering it. Inviting her to dinner was just a gesture of goodwill. She had already seen Lan Yu. He was sitting at a table by the side and did not make a sound. Since he didn't come to greet her, she naturally wouldn't look for trouble. After all, they were married in secret. However, she did not expect that Lan Yu's lackey would come to greet her. It was really a headache. She smiled faintly. "Where's your CEO Lan?" Kevin's smile was very official and very meaningful. "CEO Lan is at the table next to Madam." "Madam, didn't you see him?" The corner of Chin Chen's mouth twitched slightly. "I didn't see him." Chapter 30-21. Kevin had never thought that Chin Chen and CEO Lan would be so cold towards each other. And Chin Chen's attitude seemed a little too unruly, right? This green hat was placed on CEO Lan's head, but it didn't mean anything at all. Her face wasn't red, and her heart wasn't racing. Did women nowadays not have any sense of chastity? Kevin saw that she had no intention of joining the table, so he awkwardly sat across from Lan Yu. He was a little embarrassed. He said softly, "CEO Lan, aren't you going to do something about it?" Lan Yu glanced at him indifferently. "What's there to do?" Kevin didn't dare to say anything else. At the other table, the CEO saw that Chin Chen was in a daze, so he smiled faintly. "Miss Chin, let's talk another time. You seem to have some private matters to deal with." Chin Chen wasn't interested in this movie, so he didn't stay. "Okay, I'm sorry." She got up and watched the person leave. After sitting down, she packed her things and prepared to leave, but she had only taken one step when her hand was held. "Kevin, go back first." Lan Yu's voice was a little low. Kevin felt miserable. He couldn't even afford to eat now. He packed his things, wiped his tears and left. And Qin Chen was dragged to sit where Kevin was sitting. Lan Yu's voice was very indifferent. "Eat with me." Qin Chen smiled coldly. "Don't you want your little idiot to accompany you?" Lan Yu looked up at her and didn't say anything. He started eating. Recently, he wasn't in a good mood, so he didn't eat much. He also lost a lot of weight. Qin Chen leaned against the back of the chair and looked at him mockingly. "Why? Are you sad because the little idiot and Guze left? You don't want to eat anymore?" She was as mean as ever, and he was used to it. He wasn't annoyed, and was even in a good mood. After finishing the set meal, he wiped his lips and looked at her. "Even if you knew that Cici and Guze had left, why didn't you come back?" Qin Chen looked a little lazy. "Because I don't like you." "Are you going to send me over?" After she said that, he smiled. "Yeah, he doesn't like me." He got up and said in a quiet voice, "Move back tonight. I'll wait for you." Qin Chen sneered, "Looks like President Lan has passed the heartbreak phase. Congratulations. Nothing can change our relationship, Mrs. Lan." He leaned over and whispered, then left first. "I still have something to do. I'll be home before 8 in the evening." He was domineering and autocratic. Qin Chen did not even have the chance to resist. Lan Yu went home at 7 in the evening. Unexpectedly, Qin Chen came back. Her car was on the parking lot. Lan Yu closed the car door, and a servant came up to him. "Sir, Madam is back." Lan Yu paused and unbuttoned his jacket. "What is she doing? Has she had dinner?" The servant smiled and said, "Madam didn't do anything. She's reading a magazine on the sofa now." "Oh yes, Madam said that she wants to eat Sir's cooking, so she didn't have dinner and was waiting for him to cook." Lan Yu looked at the servant's envious expression and found it a little funny. Others didn't know what Qin Chen was thinking, but he knew it clearly. She was using different methods to torture him. He didn't care. He took off his jacket and handed it to the servant, then walked into the hall slowly. Qin Chen was indeed reading a book. When he entered, she just looked up. "You're back. I heard that you haven't eaten yet and are waiting for me to cook for you, huh?" He bent down and kissed her in front of the servant. It was not a light kiss, but a deep French kiss. Chapter 30-22. Qin Chen didn't struggle as she was kissed, but she glared at him. He was doing it on purpose. Lan Yu had kissed her enough and pressed his forehead against hers. "You seem very unhappy, Mrs. Lan." Qin Chen hated it when he called her Mrs. Lan, which sounded like a mockery. She sat up straight and put the magazine aside. "I'm hungry." He untied his tie, took it off, and slowly rolled it up in her hand. His voice was indifferent. "I'm hungry too, Mrs. Lan, but I want to feed you first." Qin Chen glared at him and was too angry to say anything. He leaned over and kissed her again, looking like he was in a good mood. A moment later, he went to the kitchen in an expensive shirt and trousers to cook for her. His cooking skills were very good. He fried a delicate steak and a few vegetables. Finally, he poured a glass of red wine for her. He leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Drink a little wine. It will make the unwilling a little more willing." Qin Chen looked up at him and didn't say anything. She was really hungry, too, so she ate slowly and elegantly. Lan Yu sat across from her and watched her eat. Qin Chen looked up. "Have you eaten?" Yes, I ate with a client. I came home early because I missed home, Lan Yu said calmly as he swirled a glass of red wine. Seeing that she was almost done eating, he got up and said, I'm going to take a shower first. Wait for me in the room. He said it so simply and rudely that the servant's face turned red. Qin Chen was a little annoyed, but there was nothing she could do. He was a bastard. He might really do something to the Rong family, and that wasn't something she could bear. She finished the red wine, and the mellow smell calmed her down a little. At the same time, her body felt a little hot. There was a strange kind of heat. Then she knew that he had added something to the wine to liven things up. Qin Chen was furious. She bit her lip and didn't want the servants to see anything wrong with her, so she slowly went upstairs. She pushed open the door of the master bedroom. Lan Yu was taking a shower, and his clothes were taken off at the end of the bed. She fell down and smelled the masculine scent on his clothes, once again confirming that she had been tricked by him. What was he doing? Was he going to do something perverted just to have sex with him? She was furious, but her body was getting hotter and hotter, and her forehead was sweating. When Lan Yu came out, he saw her like this, lying there with her long hair scattered over her shoulders. Her dress had already been pulled down to her waist. It was very alluring. Mrs. Lan, is this a surprise for me? He walked over slowly and reached out to touch her shoulder gently. Qin Chen's voice was low and sharp. Don't touch me. He leaned over, kissed her overheated lips, turned her over, pressed her against him, and kissed her. As he kissed her, he chuckled softly. This medicine won't hurt you. It's just to make you more obedient so that you won't be so insincere. You clearly like it very much, but every time we're done, you look like I've raped you. Qin Chen was furious, but her head didn't listen to her. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. If you want to do it, then hurry up. It's not that you can't take it anymore, so you purposely drugged me, right? I can't take it anymore. His expression was very ugly. He turned her face and kissed her heavily, his large palm moving down. See, that's not what your body says. He whispered nastily in her ear. Your body wants me. Do you feel it? Qin Chen couldn't take it anymore. She closed her eyes and decided to treat him like a duck. Chapter 30-23. Lan Yu had endured it for almost a month, so he was naturally very passionate. Besides, she drank that thing, so she was very passionate. After their reunion, they also had it, but how could it be as touching as this moment? Water and dew mixed. Lingering and lingering. Until they were exhausted, they hugged each other with sticky bodies. Everything was calm. Lan Yu's fingers ran through Qin Chen's hair, and he asked lazily, do you want to take a bath? Qin Chen lay on his stomach and didn't move. After a while, he said, carry me. He put his face in front of her and whispered, Mrs. Lan didn't like to be so spoiled before, huh? You weren't so despicable before, were you? Qin Chen raised her eyes and looked at him. It's very impolite to do this. Lan Yu was not in a hurry to take a bath. He reached out and touched her beautiful lips. I'm your husband. This is my right. Qin Chen's answer was to gently pat his handsome face twice, neither lightly nor heavily. Then she got out of bed wrapped in the bed sheet. Lan Yu followed her and pressed her against the bathroom wall. He turned on the warm water with one hand and waited for the bathroom to be filled with steam. Then he held her sharp chin. Qin Chen, don't forget your identity. I didn't forget. I'm afraid that Mr. Lan forgot. Qin Chen looked up at his eyes and sneered, does Mr. Lan still remember the purpose of marrying me? Is it revenge? Then I'm very happy today. Are you unhappy after hearing that, Mr. Lan? Qin Chen's expression was a little provocative. What I hate and despise most is a man who says one thing and means another. Her fingers gently scratched his heart, from bottom to bottom. It was the highest emotion. You've waited a long time for this night, haven't you? Her evil fingers were caught by him, and his eyes were a little burning. Do you know what you're talking about? She imitated him and leaned close to him. Her voice was very soft. You know in your heart that you don't hate me as much as you think. You love me, don't you? Lan Yu's expression turned ugly. He stared at her eyes and coldly smiled. I thought that after all these years, you have forgotten everything. You don't know the word love. So Mrs. Rome knew about it. Put away your weird tone. Qin Chen was even colder than him. My name is Qin Chen. I'm not Mrs. Rome or Mrs. Lan. She was unique. He had her in name and body, but that didn't mean he had her as a person. She was completely free. Qin Chen's eyes were filled with anger. This was because of what he had done tonight. You love me and hate me, but what do you take me for? Qin Chen chuckled softly. I'm just a chicken with extra money. Is that how you see our relationship? Lan Yu said unhappily. Qin Chen pursed his lips. You make me unable to think positively, or perhaps Boss Lan doesn't need me to think positively, but I don't dare to criticize Boss Lan's way. The reason why she was angry was because of Xiao Rongyu. If Xiao Rongyu was at home, would he let Rongyu see her ugly side? This was something that Qin Chen couldn't bear. She wanted respect, not him treating her like a casual woman. After that, she broke away from him and wanted to take a bath by herself. But she was grabbed by Lan Yu. I didn't expect you to be so angry. He said frankly, if you bring Rongyu back, I won't let you drink that. Chapter 30-24. She was very tired now and didn't want to be entangled with him anymore. I'm going abroad tomorrow and I'll be back in about half a month. Lan Yu, I hope you can make a decision in this half a month. After she finished showering, she wiped her body with a dry towel and said lightly. Lan Yu frowned. You're going abroad again. I'm a model. Isn't it normal to go abroad? Qin Chen's voice was indifferent. Lan Yu said without thinking, turn down this job and I'll pay you double. Her hands slowed down and she looked up at him. Look, you're here again. She ignored him, put on her bathrobe and walked out. She didn't avoid him from the beginning to the end. Just like he said, they were husband and wife, so there was no need to hide. Lan Yu stayed in the bathroom and took a cold shower. He needed to calm down and think about his relationship with Qin Chen. She said that he loved her. Was it so obvious? He took a shower for 10 minutes and walked back to the master bedroom with a touch of coolness. Qin Chen had changed the messy bed sheets and it was quite clean. She was leaning against the headboard and reading a fashion magazine. Lan Yu liked this habit, but he wasn't used to her reading it. She used to read foreign English medical magazines, and there were some in his villa. This kind of Qin Chen might be more in line with men's preferences, but he wasn't used to it and he was not satisfied. He was even angry. She forgot everything and confidently left him alone in the past. She was angry about what he did to her just now, but she didn't take it to heart because she didn't care about him. Lan Yu smiled and laughed at himself. He leaned against her and lit a cigarette. He said lightly, will you take Xiao Rongyu with you? Oh, no, my mom will take him. Qin Chen said lightly. Lan Yu probably wanted to ease the relationship, so he looked at her and said, I can take him for you. Qin Chen seemed to be stunned. Oh, no, he's going to school soon. It's better for him to relax at home. Home. Lan Yu was stunned for a moment before he realized that she didn't seem to treat this place as her home, but as a temporary place to stay. His contract with her was only for a short period of 2 to 3 years. And she gladly accepted. He also realized that she had never bought anything here. She only treated this place as a hotel. He suddenly looked at her and said, "Chin Chen, this is the most comprehensive hotel you've ever stayed in, right? A servant, a man for you to satisfy." His words were full of thorns. Chin Chen naturally wouldn't let him have it easy. He sneered, "Mr. Lan, what does this place mean to you? A family? The women here are all temporary. How much better are they compared to the one-off women in the hotel?" She looked impatient. "Please don't do shameless things while pretending to be deeply in love with me, okay? That will make me." She tilted her head and said to him very rationally, "I feel a little nauseous." "Understand." Lan Yu's face darkened. He immediately lifted the quilt and before he left, he bent down in front of her and raised his hand. "Is there a clause in our contract that allows domestic violence?" Chin Chen looked at him. There was coldness in Lan Yu's eyes. He punched at the head of the bed above her head. But Chin Chen caught it. He caught it very quickly. Lan Yu was stunned. Chin Chen was also stunned. Chapter 30-25. She was stunned for a long time before she let go of him. Boring. Then let's do something to talk about. He changed his mind. She was his wife. Even if it was temporary, she was still his wife. Why should he endure it? He could have sex with her whenever he wanted. When he tore off her bathrobe savagely, Chin Chen was furious. She picked up a magazine and hit his head. "Let go of me, bastard." But he didn't care about it, so he kissed her even harder and more savagely. They had clearly done it many times tonight, but he could still make it look like he was raping her. Chin Chen tried her best to stop him, but she couldn't. He still succeeded with brute force. He was hot. He bit her earlobe that was stained with blood. "You clearly liked it just now, but you pretended to say otherwise. Then you drugged me." Chin Chen turned her face to the side. She clenched her fists and bit them in her mouth to prevent herself from making shameful sounds. Lan Yu chuckled and kissed her chin hard. She immediately screamed. "Now, are you awake?" he said shamelessly. Then, he deliberately forced her to make shameful sounds. Their love affair wasn't just after they reunited. They had had countless nights in the past. He couldn't be more familiar with her body. Chin Chen bit her lips and turned her face away. She didn't want to look at him. But the passion burning in her blood made her abandon her armor. She became unlike herself. For the first time, she knew that she could be so devoted to this kind of thing without love. Finally, everything calmed down. She didn't make a sound, and neither did he. After a long time, Lan Yu reached out and touched his face. It hurt. He walked to the bathroom to take a look. He couldn't look anymore. From his cheek to his neck, there were a few long scratches. It was obvious that they were made by a woman. He stretched his head and looked at the woman who was lying on the bed. He snorted. "Are you a cat?" Chin Chen couldn't be bothered with him. After she took some paper towels and cleaned up, she was so tired that she fell asleep. Damn it. Didn't she come back after a busy day to be a comfortable mistress? After serving him for so long, he didn't even have a single good word to say. Before she fell asleep, she thought to herself that scratching him like this was pretty good. She probably wouldn't be able to go out for half a month. She didn't know why, but she also began to worry about being a rich lady. But it wouldn't be strange if she scratched him. She felt a little happy. So when Lan Yu came out of the bathroom and saw her sleeping face, the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. It was her smile that soothed his unwillingness. He sat on the edge of the bed and reached out to gently touch her face. He thought that when she was with him, it wasn't as unbearable and uncomfortable as she said. She always said one thing and meant another. He felt a little lost. The revenge he spoke of had all turned into revenge against himself. She was doing very well. She could sleep so happily even after being caressed by him. He thought about it and agreed. He was handsome and rich. What was there for her to be dissatisfied with? In her heart, he was most likely a free duck. However, President Lon, you know the truth. He couldn't accept it. He reached out to hold her chin and pressed his face against her. Chin couldn't stand it. She wasn't a good-tempered person to begin with. After waking up, she sat up. Lon, you're so annoying. Good, you've succeeded in taking revenge on me. She rolled up the quilt and wanted to change rooms, but he stopped her from leaving. Chapter 30-26. He didn't know what was wrong with him, but he had a feeling that he wanted to talk to her. But she didn't want to talk to him. As before, it was always his one-man show. Lon Yu dragged her back and said in a hoarse voice, "Go to sleep." Chin came back, lay down and fell asleep again. But after a while, she suddenly woke up. She opened her eyes and saw Lon Yu sitting by the bed, looking at her quietly. Probably because she was asleep, her expression was very soft, and her voice was a little lazy, which was actually a little cute. "Lon Yu, aren't you going to sleep in the guest room?" she said as she moved her face on his lap and said in a daze, "Let's argue tomorrow, okay? I'm really sleepy." She asked him to sleep in the guest room while resting her head on his lap. After sleeping for 2 minutes, she opened her eyes again and said in a nasal voice, "It's really not worth it for you to marry me. Lu Wei is what successful men like you need the most. She's obedient, gentle, and beautiful." She smiled and buried her face in his lap. "If you ask her to go east, she will never go west." As she said that, she laughed herself. And Lon Yu held his breath. This was her softest moment, and he hadn't seen it for a long time. Chin said childishly, "She will also cooperate with all kinds of perverted requests in bed. She probably won't even dare to say that you are fooling around outside." Lon Yu's voice was hoarse. "What you said is good, but that's not what I want." Chin smiled. "Then what is it that you want?" Her fingers were messy and touched the wound on his face. "This is what you want. Then I'll try harder next time," she said, her voice fading. Lon Yu wanted her to talk again, but this time she was really asleep. He was a little helpless, but he felt more pity. He reached out and touched her face gently, moving her to the pillow. People who were going to sleep in the guest room were always reluctant to leave because she was so cute and soft. He no longer had any thoughts of revenge in his heart. He just wanted to hug her. Finally, they lay down together. He was counting the seconds. Once again, she was in his arms. It was Chin, also known as Mrs. Lon. It was his fault, he thought. He should not have called her Madame Rong. She was his wife now. He vaguely decided that maybe he should let go of the past and let her fall in love with him. With her amnesia, they could start over. Lon Yu smiled. Early morning. When Chin woke up, he saw an enlarged handsome face. At this time, it was somewhat distorted, but also showed his great joy. She couldn't help biting her lower lip. "Aren't you tired?" He had done it many times last night. She felt a little tired of this kind of thing if it happened too often. It was very comfortable, but he just wanted to lie down and not move. As for Mr. Lon, it was obvious that he could perform a one-man show from beginning to end, as long as she did not resist and was obedient. He closed his eyes and looked like he was enjoying it very much. After all, Qin Chen was also made of flesh and blood. She couldn't not feel anything when such a handsome man did this to her. She comforted herself again. Just treat it as a free duck. But this duck was still quite expensive, and one duck was eaten 4 times. Qin Chen was about to vomit. She couldn't help but resist. Let go, I'm flying to Milan today. I've checked. Your flight is in the afternoon. Accompany me for the whole morning, he closed his eyes and said casually. Qin Chen was about to explode. Chapter 30-27. In the end, he still forced her to do 2 rounds. When Qin Chen finished taking a shower and eating, there was still an hour and a half left before the flight. I'll drive you. Lan Yu said calmly. Qin Chen pursed his lips and smiled faintly. Thank you, Mr. Lan. He looked at her and said meaningfully, it's my pleasure. After all, I'm the one who caused the trouble, aren't I? Qin Chen got up and took the luggage. Do you have to act like a hooligan with a serious face? He smiled faintly and didn't say much. Then he took the luggage from her hand and said calmly, let me do it. Qin Chen looked at him. I'll drive myself and park at the airport. Mrs. Lan, you're married. Marriage means mutual use. He continued to act like a hooligan with a serious face. Qin Chen couldn't do anything about him, so she got in the car. Lan Yu put the luggage in the front seat and started the car. He drove fast but steadily and arrived at the airport an hour later. The check-in was just in time, so it was a close call. Qin Chen pursed his lips and raised the ticket. Thank you. I'm going to go through the security check. Lan Yu stared at her for a long time before he whispered, wait a minute. When she wasn't paying attention, she was pulled into his arms. His tall body blocked other people's view. He leaned forward and kissed her. Qin Chen was stunned. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Although they had done it many times, she felt that such a kiss full of longing was really not suitable for them. However, Lan Yu seemed to be a little engrossed in the kiss, so she endured it. 5 minutes later, she pushed him. It's almost time to board. Lan Yu was pushed away. His slightly red face was embarrassed. He glared at her, then took her hand and personally sent her to the security check. He became tender and affectionate. Call me after you land safely. Qin Chen coughed lightly. Lan Yu, are you okay? His face instantly darkened. Of course, there's no problem. Damn it, she was looking at him as if he was a lunatic. Was he such a scumbag? Qin Chen looked at him and didn't say anything else. He just walked over to the security check. Lan Yu put his hand in his pocket and suddenly dialed her number. It made Qin Chen a little embarrassed. Her phone was placed aside. But she still picked up the phone. Lan Yu, are you done? Lan Yu's gaze was calm. Oh, I just wanted to tell you that I'll be going to New York for a business trip in 3 days. Can you tell me which hotel you're staying at? Qin Chen thought about it and decided to tell him. GM. I'll book you a presidential suite at the Grand Hyatt, he decided decisively. Qin Chen wanted to object, but he had already hung up. And she didn't know how autocratic he was until she got off the plane. He arranged for the pickup staff to take her directly to the hotel to register. It was called a presidential suite, but it was full of Lan Yu's scent. It should be his exclusive place to stay in New York, and it was usually not open to the public. There was even a coat of his on the big bed in the master bedroom, and a cigarette box of his favorite brand was on the bedside table. The waiter helped her put down her luggage and said respectfully, Mrs. Lan. Call the front desk if you need anything. Qin Chen nodded, tipped the waiter and closed the door. She was a little tired and just wanted to have a good rest. She picked up the jacket and threw it on the sofa. Without even taking a shower, she lay down. Chapter 30:28. When she took a shower, she realized that everything in the room wasn't for the hotel, but for Lan Yu's private use. While brushing her teeth, Qin Chen suddenly thought of something. She searched every corner of the room, but couldn't find a single model. "He's really meditating," she murmured as she continued brushing her teeth. She didn't know why, but she felt better. After all, she didn't want to share the same husband, even if they didn't have feelings for each other. Qin Chen pursed his lips and looked at himself in the mirror. He stuck out his tongue in a mischievous manner. She started work the next day. This time, she was going to shoot for the Asian cover of a famous fashion magazine. She hadn't expected to meet Lu Wei, and it would be a double cover. While Qin Chen was putting on makeup, she heard a sound from outside. It was Lu Wei's slightly arrogant voice. "I won't do it with Qin Chen. I won't be there if she's there." Lu Wei was so confident because she was ranked 5th in the global supermodel rankings, while Qin Chen was only 10th. For this cover shoot, her endorsement fee was 2 of Qin Chen's films, which was enough to prove that the higher-ups attached importance to her. As for Lu Wei, she placed a lot of importance on the cover this time. This cover had directly confirmed her position as Asia's #1 model. But she didn't know that Qin Chen was going to do it with her. How could she be willing to shoot with Qin Chen and let Qin Chen steal her limelight? Yes, Lu Wei knew that she wouldn't necessarily lose in terms of popularity, but in terms of ability, she couldn't beat Qin Chen. Her unreasonable request made the editor-in-chief of ZA very embarrassed and angry. It was normal for supermodels and celebrities to act like they were big shots, but they also had to recognize their own status. Qin Chen was a new star, and his future was predicted to be even further than Lu Wei's. Lu Wei was just a supermodel, so she wasn't that good at endorsing, but Qin Chen was different. Qin Chen would be a dark horse in the East, appearing out of nowhere and sweeping the world, leading the trend. But the editor-in-chief also knew that Lu Wei had a good relationship with the higher-ups, and she was so determined that things were a bit difficult. Because they couldn't afford to offend Qin Chen. Qin Chen's background was not weak. She was the owner of the largest shares of Rhone Biology in France, and the Qin family owned the largest King entertainment company in Asia. Adding all of these together, any one of them was deeper than her friendship with Lu Wei. But the higher the position, the more important the editor-in-chief didn't dare to step on it. Then she found an excuse to postpone the shoot another day. Of course, Lu Wei did some exercise, but the result wasn't ideal. When he walked out of the dressing room, Qin Chen and Lu Wei came face to face. There were 4 bodyguards standing behind Lu Wei, fully embodying the grandeur that a supermodel should have. She walked forward and looked at Qin Chen. "Don't even think about appearing in ZA magazine with me." Beside Qin Chen was a small assistant. She smiled lightly. "Actually, I only thought of it as a job and didn't really want to do it. However, Miss Lu didn't want me to do it, so I insisted on doing it." Lu Wei's face darkened. Qin Chen added another infuriating sentence, "Just like Lan Yu, I didn't want to go there in the past, but the more Miss Lu doesn't want to, the more willing she is." After Qin Chen said that, his lips curled into a cold smile. Lu Wei was furious. No one, at least in the industry, had ever dared to speak to her like that. Chapter 30:29. What is it? Qin Chen sneered. "Lu Wei, I told you long ago that you should keep what's yours. If it's not yours, there's no point in forcing it." Although she, Qin Chen, had never competed in the industry and was very easygoing. But since her identity had been exposed, she couldn't do too badly and embarrass the Qin family. Qin Chen smiled faintly and was about to leave. You're not allowed to leave. Lu Wei took a step forward, relying on her advantage. Qin Chen stood still. Lu Wei, even if there were 10 of you who dared to touch a hair of mine, you would immediately disappear from this industry. Do you believe me? Lu Wei bit her lip. She didn't believe it, but she was afraid. After all, King Entertainment controlled most of the domestic media. No matter how popular and awesome you were overseas, once the domestic mainstream media banned you, there would be nothing left. After all, modeling was a youth's livelihood. She still wanted to be in the domestic entertainment industry in the future and do variety shows. The person she couldn't afford to offend the most was Qin Mo, and Qin Mo was Qin Chen's brother. She couldn't do it openly, so she could only do it in the dark, to make Qin Chen suffer in silence. Lu Wei left. Qin Chen watched her back for a long time. Her assistant, Little Red, said indignantly, "She really thinks she's something. She's a big sister, but she only made it to the rankings once. That's impressive. She naturally has her own methods." Qin Chen flipped her long brown curly hair. "Let's not shoot anymore. I'll take a break for the next 2 days. I'll treat you to Mexican chicken later." Little Red cried, "I heard that you're staying in the Grand Hyatt Hotel's presidential suite. Aren't you going to take me to the Western restaurant there?" Qin Chen put on an expression of disbelief. Little Red said excitedly, "Sister Qin, you're so rich. Come on." Qin Chen carried her into the elevator, in a good mood. However, Sister Quan quickly called back. She was furious. "That Lu Wei is too insensible, isn't she? How dare they make such a request? No, I will call the higher-ups of ZA and demand an explanation. Are we that easy to bully?" Qin Chen's voice was very slow. "Sister Quan, isn't it better if they break the contract?" She didn't have to film any films and could still spend 10 million yuan. When Sister Quan heard that, she laughed and scolded, "I really can't do anything about you." Qin Chen leaned against the elevator and said slowly, "Just let Lu Wei jump. I won't be the one with a bad reputation in the end." Sister Quan was exasperated. "You just want to relax. Do you know how much traffic ZA has? It's worth more than 10 shows for you." Qin Chen's smile grew even lazier. "Actually, when I look at Lu Wei's face, it's quite disgusting." Sister Quan was one of the few people who knew that Qin Chen was married, so she smiled unkindly. "Do you mind that your husband might have slept with Lu Wei?" Qin Chen smiled. "I don't think so. Look at Lan Yu and Lu Wei. They both look like they owe them 2 million yuan. No matter how angry Sister Quan was, her anger dissipated. Anyway, Qin Chen was right. They had already gotten the money, so it was the other party who broke the contract. What was there to be afraid of? It was just that she didn't vent her anger. On the other side, Qin Chen hung up the phone. He didn't expect that Lu Wei still had tricks up her sleeves. The fashion industry was the same as the entertainment industry. There were all kinds of dark secrets that caught you off guard. It was just that this little dark secret had blown up Lan Yu and Qin Chen's secret marriage. Chapter 30. Qin Chen brought Little Red to the Grand Hyatt Hotel. They went to that famous restaurant and ordered a lot of high-calorie food. Little Red's expression was complicated. If Sister Quan finds out, she made a hand gesture. "Kill me." Qin Chen smiled. "Just don't let her find out. Besides, you can still be my assistant even if you don't want to be a model anymore. It's not a problem for me to support you." If he really couldn't support her, Qin Chen thought immorally, "I'll just let Lan Yu support me. He likes to do good things anyway." As Qin Chen thought of this, he smiled faintly. Her smile was so charming that a handsome foreign man sat down next to her and struck up a conversation with her. The man spoke with a pure British accent. He looked charming and his voice was also charming. Qin Chen was able to deal with him easily, but Little Red almost fainted. Her eyes were filled with hearts. He was so handsome. The foreign man even performed a little magic trick. Qin Chen held his chin and looked like he was enjoying it. Little Red sighed inwardly. There was a huge difference between people. Qin Chen ate happily and chatted with the handsome foreign man. In the dark, the camera was on her. Even when the man politely sent them to their room, the camera ignored Little Red and went straight to Qin Chen and the man. And the suite was Lan Yu's room. When the news broke out, it was mediocre abroad, but it blew up in China. Qin Chen met a mysterious man and spent the night together. Such headlines were very eye-catching. At the headquarters of Grand Hyatt in B City, Lan Yu threw down the newspaper and pressed the intercom. "Kevin, get in here in 1 minute." Kevin, who was in the secretary's office, felt wronged. He wasn't the one who made the boss a cuckold. Why did he have to get out? But he didn't dare not come. He coughed and said, "Boss, do you need a private plane? We'll take off in an hour." Lan Yu took his coat and car keys and walked out. What happened to Qin Chen couldn't be a coincidence. Someone must have instructed him to do so. Moreover, he and Qin Chen had a secret marriage. Now the first step was to expose Qin Chen's scandal, and the next step would be to expose his marriage with Qin Chen. Then, he would never be able to clear his name of adultery. He, Lan Yu, would be green all over his head. He had to deal with this matter as soon as possible. As he walked, he told Kevin, "Send out a press release. Just say that I'm with Qin Chen in New York. Announce our marriage." Kevin was a little frightened. "Do we need to ask for Miss Qin's opinion on this?" Lan Yu tilted his head and his expression was very ugly. "She's already cuckolded me. Do you think I still need her opinion?" Kevin didn't say anything else. He coughed lightly and said somewhat uncomfortably, "Then I'll do it immediately." More than 10 hours later, Lan Yu appeared in the presidential suite of the Grand Hyatt in New York. He put down his luggage and slowly walked to the master bedroom. It was early in the morning in New York, so Qin Chen was still sleeping. She was sleeping soundly with her face buried in the pillow, looking carefree. Lan Yu walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and touched her face. She had made such a big mess, and there were rumors outside. Even his father had specially called him and asked him if there was anything wrong with his body. She, on the other hand, was sleeping here without a care in the world. Of course, he believed that she had nothing to do with that man. Chapter 30-31. Because he had checked the surveillance footage. Her assistant was there too. The man had left after sending them back. But this would also make him uncomfortable. Attracting bees and butterflies. He spat out these words unwillingly, then took off his coat and threw it aside, followed by other clothes. After taking it off, he went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. When he came out, he wrapped himself in a bath towel and ordered breakfast for himself. Then, he sat in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and smoked, waiting for the waiter to bring it up. Breakfast was delivered in 10 minutes. A silver dining car had all kinds of exquisite breakfast on it. There was also a bouquet of pink roses, which were even stained with morning dew. Lan Yu opened the door and let the waiter in. After tipping him, he closed the door. Qin Chen still hadn't woken up. He couldn't help but wonder how crazy she had been last night to sleep so soundly. Thus, he took a rose and walked towards her. The rose gently touched her cheek, and Qin Chen felt a little itchy. She just patted it lightly and turned over to continue sleeping. Piggy. Lan Yu chuckled, leaned over, and kissed her with his hands on both sides of her body. The kiss was a little lingering. He didn't know why. He should be angry with her, but when he saw her sleeping on his bed, he couldn't be angry at all. As the kiss deepened, she finally woke up. She opened her eyes and looked at him in disbelief. Then she blinked. Lan Yu. She sat up and shook her head. Why are you here? He locked his eyes on her and sneered, if I don't come, I'm afraid I'll wear a green hat from New York to be city. Qin Chen looked at him. Do you believe it? I don't believe it, but others will. Or if they don't believe it, they'll light a party. He said seriously, now I need to make our marriage public. Qin Chen's eyes widened. You can't. I can. I've already done that. There was a hint of joy in Lan Yu's voice. Didn't your assistant or Sister Quan tell you? Qin Chen glared at him. He nodded understandingly. It seems that you're a failure as a person. Qin Chen snorted. Nonsense. She raised her eyebrows. Aren't you afraid that I'll really make you a cuckold? You won't. Lan Yu then changed into a bathrobe and walked towards the dining room. It's just that I really don't like it when you're with the opposite sex. What did he mean by he didn't like her being with the opposite sex? Did she not want to come into contact with men? In her workplace, most of the staff were men, but he didn't say anything about it. However, Qin Chen didn't have time to think about this because there was a very fragrant smell in the air. It was the smell of food. She immediately lifted the quilt and ran over barefoot. A bouquet of roses was thrown into her arms. She hugged them and smelled them. Then, she sat down beside him. So it turns out that you can still get a gift after cheating. Can I say that CEO Lan is really generous? Qin Chen said, amused. Lan Yu glanced at her and didn't say anything as he continued to eat his breakfast. However, Qin Chen was not afraid of death. She dared to continue, then I'll ask out a few more men in the future. Try it. Lan Yu reached out and shook her hand gently. She cried out softly, eat. Breakfast is different with you. Lan Yu didn't let go of her. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. His thin lips gently covered the back of her ear and murmured, do it here once. Chapter 30-32. Qin Chen was furious. Are you here to take care of business, or are you here to, as a reward, he murmured. Do you want to do it yourself, or do you want me to do it, huh? Qin Chen closed his eyes and said, can we go back to bed after breakfast? Okay. He then let go of her and let her go back to her seat to eat breakfast. She glared at him, feeling that he was uneasy. Speaking of which, he came to New York to take care of business, but she didn't know if he had come to the country to have sex. Therefore, Qin Chen also despised him. Lan Yu said as he ate, I'm not messing around in the country. Mrs. Lan should be happy. Messing around is good, she said in a low voice. Lan Yu raised his eyes and looked at her quietly. You don't mean what you say. I'm not. She lowered her eyes and reached out to stroke her long hair. It was quite a seductive action. However, Lan Yu's focus wasn't on that. He stared at her face and asked, you don't seem to have washed your face and brushed your teeth. Qin Chen, you're already eating breakfast? The Qin Chen he knew in the past wasn't like this. Except during the surgery, he was extremely hairy. Qin Chen looked at him and said, yes. He restrained his voice and said, you weren't so lazy before. She looked a lot more beautiful and feminine now, but she still couldn't change what was in her bones. Suddenly, Lan Yu accepted Qin Chen's change from the bottom of his heart. She had become a real woman. She had changed, so she had let go of her obsession with Rong Lei. In fact, it didn't matter if she didn't let go. Rong Lei didn't have anything left, so there was nothing to miss. Lan Yu smiled and put down his knife and fork. Mrs. Lan, is that okay? However, he was just asking for her opinion. He soon picked her up and walked to the master bedroom. Qin Chen patted him on the shoulder. I knew you were here for this. You're still so stupid because of this. You still care about me. Lan Yu said unhappily and then kissed her lips. Early in the morning, both men and women were only wearing pajamas and bathrobes. His body smelled fresh and fragrant from the shower gel, which was intoxicating. They weren't quarreling, so their bodies were naturally attracted to each other. Hugging had become a very normal thing. She was pressed between the mattress and kissed. His hands moved up and down her body. His kiss was very aggressive and there was not a single gap between them. Qin Chen couldn't take it anymore, but he still remembered something and pushed him away slightly. You don't have that thing here? Lan Yu propped himself up and lowered his head to kiss the corner of her mouth. His eyes were clear. Which one? She mouthed a word to him. Then he kissed her hard. Qin Chen, why are you looking for this here? What are you looking for this for, huh? He bit her lips angrily. With another man. I'm checking on you. She couldn't do anything about it. She turned over and sat on him. If you dare to do this to me again, I'll bite you to death. Childish. Lan Yu was pressed down by her like this, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he reached out one hand and dialed the internal line naturally. He used fluent English to ask the front desk to send 2 big boxes of condoms. Qin Chen sat on him and covered her face. She couldn't listen to him anymore. He was really shameless. He had specially told her about the taste, thickness, and sensitivity. Chapter 30-33. You're already so old and you've already given birth to a child. How can you still be shy? He naturally couldn't say it out loud. He didn't mind Rong Yu's identity that much. She had given birth to the child, and he liked the child too. Qin Chen refused to let go and let him kiss her, so he pestered her. There was a knock on the door. He paused and patted her. Go get it. I'm not going, Qin Chen said stubbornly. At this moment, she was a bit like a child. She was a very mature woman, but she was very relaxed in front of him. It was probably because she had been too indulgent these days, and her body and mind were happy. Lan Yu looked at her deeply and patted her lazily. Then move away so I can go. Qin Chen didn't move, and then she hugged him shamelessly. Don't go. He raised his eyebrows. What are you doing now? Do you want to give birth to a son for me to make up for the trouble you caused in New York? The news was released by your ex-fiancé. Qin Chen buried her face in his neck and said impolitely. Lan Yu looked at her and snorted. Is that so? He looked at her with a serious expression. Qin Chen snorted. Of course, as she framed me. It sounds innocent, but Mrs. Lan, did you smile at that man? Did you ask someone to send it back? He patted her impolitely, as if he was secretly punishing her. Qin Chen didn't say anything. Lan Yu didn't move her to the side, but carried her to the door. He opened the door with one hand and took the 2 big boxes from the receptionist with the other. After closing the door, she was in trouble. He was fast, and he was already ready when he arrived at the master bedroom. He took her down in one fell swoop. Qin Chen stroked his handsome and twisted face, bit his lips and said angrily, You're here to have sex. You really know me. He gritted his teeth, but then he closed his eyes to enjoy it and warned her, Pay attention. He felt unsatisfied when he closed his eyes, so he opened them to kiss her. If it weren't for the surveillance, he really suspected that Mrs. Land's active cooperation was because she had done something wrong. However, he also thought that she didn't do anything out of line in the hotel. How would he know if they were outside? Thus, he tortured her even more ruthlessly. As he tortured her, he asked in a low voice, "Tell me, did you and him do the same? Other than me, have you ever seen anyone else make you like this?" Qin Chen's brown hair was spread out on the pillow and her facial features were especially charming. Hearing his words, she opened her eyes and said in a hoarse voice, "What? Can other people satisfy you as much as I do?" He felt like he was going to die, indulging in this feeling. Qin Chen couldn't take it anymore. He turned his head and bit the pillow. When she did not speak, he became even more unreasonable. He did it again and again. Just like that, after 2 hours, he finally loosened his grip on her and started to take his time. He hugged her from behind and asked in a low voice, "Qin Chen, are you happy?" "Qin Chen." Qin Chen froze for a moment. It seemed like it was the first time he had called her that since they were together. But he said it so naturally, she had a feeling that Lan Yu seemed to have changed. It seemed like he had thought through something and made some decisions. Qin Chen thought it through, but her head was dizzy and she couldn't understand it. Only now did she know that men were misleading. Chapter 30-34. After a whole morning, Lan Yu was finally satisfied. After 2 hours of sleep, he started to make some calls, mainly to the public relations department. Qin Chen leaned against the headboard lazily, painting her nails. After making the calls, Lan Yu went back to bed and smoked a cigarette. He looked at her and said, "Are you not going to be on the cover of ZA's magazine?" Qin Chen said indifferently, "I don't really care. It's mainly about what the magazine thinks. If it's because of Lu Wei's feelings, it's fine if I take the money and don't do anything." Lan Yu frowned. She hadn't thought about how Lu Wei's team would pressure her if she didn't do the shoot. However, Qin Chen knew about it. She just couldn't be bothered to care about it. Lan Yu shook his head and said, "How did you become an international supermodel?" "Natural beauty and a little luck." Qin Chen chuckled and said, "Why? Do you want me to quit for my ex-girlfriend?" He patted her face and said, "Bullshit." He thought for a moment and said, "Actually, there's nothing between us. At most, it was just a few light kisses." Nothing had happened. Qin Chen stared at him and said, "Is that an explanation?" "It's obvious." Lan Yu's eyes were clear. Qin Chen felt that it was a bit troublesome. Lan Yu seemed to be serious. Lan Yu had always thought that when he hated her more than he loved her, he wouldn't be so good to her and he wouldn't want to be with her for a long time. However, it was obvious that he had lost his mind and wanted to love her. A long time wasn't what Qin Chen wanted. She coughed and said, "Actually, it's not that important. You really don't have to keep yourself pure for me." Lan Yu frowned and immediately understood what she was thinking. She didn't want him. At least, she didn't want to be with him forever. It didn't feel good. It was like going back to 3 or 4 years ago. He looked at her for a long time but didn't say anything. He just lifted the blanket and walked out. Qin Chen felt that he was going through menopause again. Were all men so emotional nowadays? But she still had to care about his feelings. After all, she was counting on him to solve the ZA issue and her scandal. If Lan Yu stood out now and said a word that was not good for her, her career would be over. Although she didn't care that much, Qin Chen didn't have the habit of letting others take advantage of him. In the end, Qin Chen still walked to the study room attached to the suite. When he opened the door, he saw Lan Yu smoking. His expression was one of disillusionment. For some reason, Chen felt a little sad when he saw this. She whispered, "Lan Yu. You're here because I'm still useful, right?" He looked up at her, his eyes red. Chen pursed her lips and said softly, "No." She walked over to Lan Yu and said, "Aren't you afraid of meeting God by smoking so much every day?" He let her take the cigarette and put it away, but he lit another one and continued smoking. Chen frowned and said, "Just smoke yourself to death." With that, she ignored him and prepared to go out. He caught her hand and her body fell into his embrace. He hugged her tightly and said in a low voice, "Don't go." His voice was hoarse and he was begging her not to go. He said in a low voice, "I shouldn't be like this. I forgot about you, forgot about me, forgot that you don't love me." Chen was a little stunned. She didn't know why, but she felt sad when she heard him say such things. It was as if she owed him a lot. Chapter 30-35. So she asked him softly, "Lan Yu, have we ever been in love before?" In her memory, she didn't remember loving Rong Lei, but she had given birth to a child for Rong Lei, but she subconsciously felt that something was wrong. As for what was wrong, she couldn't tell. Lan Yu smiled, shook his head, and said indifferently, "No, never." Chen was stunned. She was a little disappointed. Had she really never loved him? Why did she feel uncomfortable when she saw his dejected look? So she forced a smile. Maybe in the future. Lan Yu lit a cigarette out of habit and said, "Actually, it doesn't matter if you don't like it." Because he was used to it. "Go out first." "I want to be alone for a while," he said calmly. He didn't make things difficult for her. Chen felt that arguing with her and being fierce with her was better than this. At least she didn't need to care like this. She pursed her lips and gave him space. But when she walked out of the door, Lan Yu's voice came from behind her. "Chen, it's actually not like that. I used to love you very much. There was a time when you thought you loved me, and I thought so too." As he said these words, his voice was full of bitterness. Chen was a little stunned. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "I'm sorry." "You shouldn't say sorry if you don't love someone." He smiled. "But you're my wife now, Chen." Chen looked at him and suddenly ran in. She hugged him gently. "Lan Yu. I can work hard." He naturally understood what she meant, so he chuckled softly. "Don't force yourself. I don't want it." "I promise I'll work hard," Chen said seriously. Lan Yu smiled. She probably hadn't promised anyone like this before. "Then I'll wait and see." With that, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. She pushed against him. When she was unwilling, he whispered, "Didn't you just say you wanted to work hard? Why are you so reluctant now?" Chen looked at him speechlessly. "I'm afraid that you'll die when your essence runs out." Wasn't he tired of doing this all day long? Lan Yu was stunned for a while before he slowly said, "You don't know how a man feels after 4 years of abstinence. Chen, come here. If you don't do it soon, I'll be too old to move." He was now over 35 years old and was considered an uncle. Men of this age also had a common problem, which was that they doubted themselves or were afraid that women would think that they couldn't do it, so they had to prove themselves. Chen was the person he wanted to prove. He had been there for 2 days. In the end, Chen had been woken up by Sister Kwan's phone call. "ZA has decided to abandon you. Lu Wei's solo edition." He, isn't that hot news? Chen was still a little lazy. She climbed out of the blanket and answered the phone with one hand while plucking a man's xiong hair with the other. She was a little bored as she counted. Let her do it. I'm doing it with her ex-fiancé now. I think I'm feeling pretty good, Qin Chen said casually. Sister Quan was furious. Qin Chen, you can still fool around with men now. What kind of situation is this? We're legally married, not fooling around. Qin Chen said slowly. Chapter 30-36. Qin Chen smiled. Actually, I think so too. Sister Quan was speechless. She felt that she had brought along a piece of trash. His smile was especially beautiful. However, she also knew that the reason why Qin Chen was like this was because of his family's circumstances. She didn't need to experience those dark things. She had the capital to do whatever she wanted. What Lu Wei and the others pursued their entire lives, Qin Chen had it since birth. Therefore, when Lu Wei came to fight with Qin Chen, she was like a clown. It meant that no matter how you jumped around, others would ignore you. While Sister Quan was letting her imagination run wild, Lan Yu picked up the phone. As soon as Sister Quan spoke, she went straight to the point. President Lan, you've already married him. What do you plan to do now? Lan Yu said in a low voice, my marriage with Qin Chen has been announced in B City. I'll arrange for an interview in New York for ZA's special. He didn't know Sister Quan's reaction, but Qin Chen was stunned. Lu Wei was on the cover, and it was an interview between her and Lan Yu, and it was about marriage. Wasn't that strange? After Lan Yu hung up the phone, she looked at him and said, are you going to let your ex-girlfriend attack you? She snorted softly. I don't want to make enemies. She sighed and said, actually, you had a change of heart. She should be looking for you if she's angry. Lan Yu, I'm innocent. No. He said with certainty, I never had a change of heart. Qin Chen was stunned and blinked. Was he confessing? Lan Yu still looked at her. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Chen Chen, a person may like many people in their life, but there must be one person they love the most. She looked at him and blinked for a long time. She was rarely so soft in front of him. Needless to say, in the past, she was simply a man. After they reunited, she was also very cold. Now, it was just right. Lan Yu murmured, Chen Chen, leave it to me. I'll handle it. Qin Chen smiled weakly. I'm not a timid person. I know. He smiled. Then let's be more high profile. The Grand Hyatt Corporation's press release was still very useful. In addition, Lan Yu and Qin Chen had accepted an exclusive interview with the BBC in the US, and they chose ZA for the paper interview. And Qin Chen and Lan Yu were on the cover of ZA's global edition. This series of events was like a slap to Lu Wei's face. More importantly, the filming was done on the same day in the same studio. ZA's boss wasn't a pushover either. He used Lu Wei and Lan Yu's relationship as a selling point and made a big deal out of the magazine. He was secretly prepared to double the print run. And Lu Wei didn't know that she was still arguing with ZA's chief editor. ZA's chief editor was also speechless. Lu Wei didn't know that her actions weren't just personal, they had become a selling point. Unknowingly, she had become a dishonorable character. This was very detrimental to her future career. But Lu Wei couldn't see it. She was protesting against the shoot. It was fine if she didn't do it, but ZA's boss was doing it. If she didn't do it, it would be a breach of contract. Would she pay the 50 million penalty? What a joke, they had already spent a lot of money to promote this issue. If Lu Wei said she didn't do it, wouldn't all their previous investments go down the drain? This was something ZA couldn't tolerate. If Lu Wei dared to breach the contract, not only would she have to pay, she would also be blacklisted. Chapter 30-37. Behind Lu Wei, there were many oriental faces waiting to rise. She wasn't young anymore, but she didn't have any self-awareness. She was still acting big, and these foreigners wouldn't care about her. Of course, there was also Lan Yu's operation. He didn't care about these interests. He only wanted Qin Chen not to feel wronged or angry. In addition, this was also a warning to Lu Wei. However, Lu Wei didn't have such a consciousness at all. She felt that everything was caused by Qin Chen. Therefore, she still had to turn the tide for the cover. She wanted to take the most stunning photos and let Lan Yu know who was better, her or Qin Chen. When taking photos, Lu Wei met Lan Yu and his wife. Qin Chen had an extra diamond ring on his ring finger. It was so big that it almost blinded Lu Wei's eyes. No, it was stinging. She looked at Lan Yu holding Qin Chen. His expression was very focused. He had never been so focused when he was with her. Lu Wei pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Her face was already very ugly. Lan Yu didn't say anything to her. He gave Lu Wei compensation, and he didn't have sex with Lu Wei. Even the engagement was arranged by her own initiative. He was responsible, but it was all because she was too anxious. Lan Yu didn't feel guilty, probably because he didn't care so much. But when taking photos, Lu Wei wasn't so calm. Qin Chen was shooting the cover with Lan Yu, which was simply humiliating for her. But she wouldn't give up. She wanted to outshine Qin Chen. However, 1-on-2, she had already lost. Not to mention that it was a cover that abused dogs. The cover of Lan Yu and Qin Chen was very simple. It was taken in the kitchen. Lan Yu wore a simple white shirt and black casual pants, while Qin Chen wore a loose beige t-shirt. His hair was a little fluffy, and his long slender legs were straight and bare. He hugged Lan Yu from behind. Lan Yu turned his head and looked at her. The scene was beautiful. The cameraman took a few photos and looked at them one by one, asking them to style them. There was a picture of Qin Chen being carried onto the tabletop and Lan Yu kissing him while standing. It was especially beautiful. The head of ZA personally made the decision. This will be the cover. When Qin Chen was changing his clothes, he met Lu Wei in the changing room. Lu Weikai was very confident after taking the photo. She glanced at Qin Chen and said, "You and him won't last long." The reason why he announced it was because he was afraid of the scandal. That's why you shouldn't announce it, because you're afraid of a scandal, right? Qin Chen touched up a little bit of lipstick in front of the mirror, put away her makeup bag, and said lightly, "Actually, people who deceive themselves live a very tiring life. They also live for others." She had never regarded Lu Wei as an opponent. Whether it was her career or Lan Yu. The modeling industry was purely because she was fooling around. As for Lan Yu, she did not care that much about it. So there was no need for Lu Wei to do this. She would be confused and Lu Wei would be tired. Qin Chen felt that it was not worth it. She just wanted to enjoy life now. Of course, Lan Yu was indeed restraining her. If it wasn't for his threat, she would probably never have the chance to live with such a man. For now, it seemed like it was not bad. She did not intend to return it to Lu Wei. Basically, if Qin Chen liked to use something, he would use it until it was worn out. If a man used it until it was worn out, could he still use it? When she was about to walk out, Lu Wei said, "I won't lose to you." "Up to you." Qin Chen's tone was very calm. "But you might be disappointed." Lu Wei gritted her teeth and left first. Chapter 30-38. Lan Yu's eyes were deep. "It has nothing to do with you. Lu Wei, my patience is limited." "Really?" Lu Wei laughed coldly. She laughed mockingly. Lan Yu, our past is not in the past anymore, right? There was a cold smile on her face. You will regret it. After saying that, when Qin Chen walked out, Lu Wei leaned over and kissed the corner of Lan Yu's lips. Lan Yu frowned and looked at Qin Chen. Qin Chen didn't seem to mind at all. He said calmly, "Do you want to leave for a bit?" Chen Chen. He called her angrily. Lu Wei's expression changed. Chen Chen, did Lan Yu call Qin Chen like that? Then what was she? He had never called her by her nickname. And how long had Lan Yu and Qin Chen been together? They were living together. Not only did they live together, but they also made it known to the world. Their love was love, but her feelings were feelings. Lu Wei walked away with a sullen expression. In fact, no matter who took the cover better, she had already lost. The comments in China had long been reversed. It was all about Lan Yu and Qin Chen's love. Of course, there was also a grand wedding. And the person who made Lan Yu's secret marriage come to light was none other than Lu Wei herself. When Zia's cover came out, Lu Wei completely broke down. Qin Chen and Lan Yu were very natural. Lu Wei was a model herself, so she naturally knew what it meant to get rid of and what it meant to shoot naturally. She sat on the toilet alone, staring at the photos and crying her heart out. She lost. She was utterly defeated. Her agent called and scolded her. This time, Lu Wei was almost blacklisted by the company. But she didn't give up. She lost in love, but she would definitely win in other areas. She wanted to crush Qin Chen in the supermodel rankings. At that moment, the announcement of Qin Chen's withdrawal from the fashion circle came out. Qin Chen quit. When she was at the peak of her popularity. Even Lan Yu was surprised. He returned to the villa, thinking about how to talk to Qin Chen about it. When he came back, he untied his coat and asked the servants, "Where's Madam?" The servant looked surprised. "Madam is upstairs." Lan Yu walked upstairs, casually threw his coat on the back of the sofa, and looked at the master bedroom. Qin Chen was not there. He went in and heard a noise coming from the locker room. He went and opened the door. Qin Chen was packing his luggage. Lan Yu frowned. "Where are we going?" They had only been back for 2 days, and the wedding was in a week. She had announced her retirement from the fashion industry, and now she was going out again. Qin Chen said without thinking, "Go back to France." Back to France. And she used the word "go back." She was packing her luggage, so she didn't see how upset he was. Lan Yu frowned and said softly, "Qin Chen, who are you going to see this time? You found that you don't love me, but you found that you are happier with him. Did you find that you and he are in the same world, huh? Even though I can easily crush that kingdom, you still love him, don't you?" His face was ugly, and he approached her step by step. In the end, he pressed her against the wardrobe in the locker room. Before she could react, her clothes were torn to pieces. Lan Yu's eyes were bloodshot. At that moment, there was a red mist in front of him. He didn't know what was wrong with him. He only knew that he couldn't let her go. He had to keep her. The servant also saw Lan Yu's appearance and felt that there was something wrong between the couple. Qin Chen paused. "I'm on a business trip." The servant hesitated for a moment and asked, "Madam, when will you come back so that I can tell Sir?" Qin Chen looked at her. After a while, he said calmly, "I will never come back." After saying that, she put her luggage into the suitcase, opened the door and got into the car. She had very few things here to begin with, and this box of things was emptied. The servant wanted to stop her, but he couldn't. He could only call Lan Yu. But he couldn't get through. Chapter 30-40. The next day, the photos of Lan Yu and a starlet in the hotel appeared on the headlines. The financial section, the entertainment section, none of them could be missed. With such a big commotion, Qin Chen naturally wouldn't miss it. She sat quietly on the sofa, reading the newspaper. She didn't call to ask, because that was what a wife who loved her husband deeply would do. She just flew to France to deal with some things. When she flew back, it was already a month later. A month was enough for a lot of things to happen. For example, Lan Yu promoted Lu Wei. Qin Chen became yesterday's flower. Qin Chen didn't care about this. She sat in her apartment. She thought that she was ready to love him well. However, she gave up the career that she was interested in, she gave up the Rome Corporation, she didn't care about the world, and she didn't get that man's trust. They were actually vulnerable. It wasn't that he said he loved her, and she wanted to love him well. He was mentally ill, so the slightest thing was enough to make him suspect her. She didn't know their past. Now she didn't want to think about it. Qin Chen went on a trip with little Rong Yu. She sold the Rome Corporation. She resisted the pressure and diluted the shares of the Rome Corporation, and the laboratory of the Rome Corporation was permanently sealed. That was the only thing she had left in the Rome Corporation. No one else could touch it except her. Because of independence, she used the shares of the entire Rome Corporation to get it. Qin Chen thought that maybe the reason why she didn't do this at the beginning was not because she couldn't bear to give up the wealth. It was because she didn't hate Lan Yu. That was why she slept with him over and over again. At that time, he and Lu Wei were still together. She had liked him, she thought. Qin Chen smiled and let the night wind blow on her face. Now she didn't want anything. She just wanted to be quiet. She returned to B City for a few days, and it wasn't that she didn't hear about Lan Yu's scandal. She didn't care about other small stars, but she was really disgusted by Lu Wei. Qin Chen had always been a little clean, so of course she couldn't accept it. When she went to Xingyuan the next day, she ran into Huang Xia. Her distant cousin was now disabled. Cousin Huang always looked at her with a hateful gaze, but Qin Chen couldn't be bothered with her. This time, Huang Xia's gaze was much kinder. She even asked Qin Chen to sit in the Starbucks across the street. The two of them sat down. Huang Xia looked at Qin Chen and suddenly handed her a photo. Qin Chen took it. It was a strange version of himself. Do you see? This is how you used to be. Huang Xia chuckled, a little mocking. For Ronglei, you turned yourself into a man for more than 10 years. Later on, it was Lan Yu who changed you. You two like each other very much. Qin Chen squinted at her. What are you talking about? The wonderful story is at the end. Like an old witch in a fairy tale, Huang Xia's voice was hoarse and evil. Later, Ronglei came back to life, and you were with Ronglei again. The premise was that you discovered Lan Yu's disloyalty, but that was also your own doing. Of course, later you fell in love with Lan Yu, but Ronglei threatened you and took you to France. Chapter 30-41. Qin Chen just looked at her quietly. It's really interesting. But for someone who lost his memory, nothing else matters except the ending. You want to give up on him? Huang Xia's voice was incredulous. Qin Chen got up and looked at her condescendingly. Why can't I? He let you down. Your sacrifice has been in vain. Don't you feel pain? Don't you feel sad? Huang Xia was very immersive. I won't. Qin Chen's voice was very slow. If I really sacrificed something in the past, then it must have been something I was willing to do. But now, he isn't worthy of my love, so I won't take back anything. With that said, she walked out in a straight line. Huang Xia stood up immediately. Qin Chen, you haven't changed at all. You're still so stubborn and still don't care about anyone. Qin Chen turned back and smiled faintly. When others don't care about you that much, you still hug his leg and beg. Isn't that too laughable and cheap? Huang Xia's body swayed as if she had suffered a huge blow. In fact, that was indeed the case. She had never thought that Qin Chen would be like this, that he would be so indifferent. She laughed. All these years, she had been too silly. Everything she was stubborn about was a joke in Qin Chen's eyes. When Qin Chen walked out, he happened to meet someone he shouldn't have touched. Lan Yu and Lu Wei. She lowered her gaze and smiled lightly. When you're free, you can sign your name. Lan Yu, you should have received the divorce agreement I sent, right? Lan Yu stared at her. He knew that she had misunderstood. Lu Wei was supported by Qin Mo and it had nothing to do with him. As for that little celebrity, he did have the intention to anger her, but it was just a little ambiguous. He didn't sleep with other women. Of course, he didn't want to explain it to her. Both of them were angry, so it was impossible to have a good talk. Lu Wei smiled. Lan Yu, do you need me to leave for a while? Qin Chen said calmly, no need. I'll find another place for you. Lan Yu grabbed her hand. Don't go. His Adam's apple bobbed. We'll talk when we get back tonight. I won't. Qin Chen said softly, I won't go back. His brow furrowed. Then, he heard Qin Chen say something very lethal, if you've loved me, you should know that I'm a neat freak. With that, she broke free from him and went straight to the parking lot to get her car. Lan Yu abandoned Lu Wei and chased after her. Qin Chen had already sat in the white BMW and was about to start the car. Lan Yu couldn't stop her, so he ran to the front to stop the car. Qin Chen's eyes were slightly cold, and he didn't seem to stop. In the end, he still retreated to the side, his face covered in dirt. He stood there and watched her car disappear into the distance. Lan Yu had a feeling that he had completely lost her this time. Huang Xia floated out of nowhere. She looked at Lan Yu and said straightforwardly, it was your lack of trust that caused you to lose her. She smiled softly and said, who do you think Qin Chen is? How dare you provoke her like this? Lan Yu, I really want to tell you a story. It's very nice. Do you want to hear it? Lan Yu didn't want to bother with this lunatic, but the lunatic kept pestering him. But Madman kept pestering him. Just now, I told Qin Chen that her sacrifice back then was a mistake. Guess what she said? Chapter 30-42. I mean, she left you and went to France because she didn't want you to be hurt. Even the child in her belly. Didn't you suspect that it wasn't Ronglei's? That child is so much like you. Unfortunately, her surname is probably Rong now. Ha, Lan Yu, this is your retribution. Huang Xia said happily, I've been waiting for this day for a long time. She laughed crazily, Lan Yu, Qin Chen sacrificed so much for you and even forgot everything about you. Have you ever thought that she might face a madman like Rong Lei when she was pregnant with your child? Lan Yu clenched his fingers. He stared at Huang Xia, who told you this? Myself. Huang Xia looked at him with a look of disdain, do you really love her? If you love her, you won't doubt her. In fact, I feel sorry for Qin Chen, but it's good that she has forgotten about it now. At least she doesn't have to suffer anymore. Lan Yu closed his eyes slightly and turned to get into his car. He wanted to find Qin Chen. What should he say to her when he found her? He didn't know. He only knew that he had to find her. Lan Yu drove to Qin Chen's apartment. He had a hunch that she would be there. He saw her car at the foot of her building. He stopped the car, opened the door, and got out. He took the elevator to the top floor. He knocked on the door and about 5 minutes later, she opened the door. She was wearing a bathrobe. She opened the door and looked at him quietly. Lan Yu was about to speak when he saw that she wasn't alone. There was a young and good-looking man inside. Lan Yu had seen him before. He should be a member of a certain idol group. He was very popular recently. The man was lying casually on Qin Chen's sofa. His face was tilted as if he was asleep. Qin Chen had just returned, which meant that the man had been at Qin Chen's house. They were living together. This was Lan Yu's first reaction. Then he narrowed his eyes and looked at Qin Chen's face. Who is he? Qin Chen tilted his head. You should know who he is. Lan Yu's hand grabbed her and pulled her out. His face twisted as he asked through gritted teeth, what I'm asking is, what is his relationship with you? Qin Chen looked at him and chuckled. My relationship with him is the same as your relationship with those starlets and Lu Wei. Oh, right, Pei Jingyu is quite young, I call him little puppy. The veins on Lan Yu's forehead bulged. He held her neck and said hoarsely, get him out of here immediately. You're the one who should scram. Qin Chen's tone was indifferent. She tilted her head and said, Lan Yu, I hate how unpredictable you are. I don't like how you're in control of everything. I hate it even more when you act like I owe you $2 million. His expression was gloomy. Aren't you afraid that I'll attack the Rhone Consortium? Do it. Qin Chen smiled. Lan Yu, I'm not so great that I have to trade my freedom for other people's happiness. You can do whatever you want. Up to you. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and said softly, it seems that you've done a lot these days. Qin Chen lowered his eyes and lowered his voice. Lan Yu, if you hadn't gone to find someone else that day, we wouldn't have come this far. He wanted to say something, but she interrupted him. Not every woman will stand there and wait for you. At least, I won't. Sia told me about our past. Chapter 30-43. Qin Chen looked at him with a gentle expression. Lan Yu, no matter what happened in the past, I can't accept you after we're together again, so you want to divorce me and be with this gigolo? He held her shoulders and asked her in a low voice, what can he give you? You and he don't live in the same world. You once told me. I said that the past isn't important. The future is the most important. Qin Chen laughed at himself. He can give me happiness. He won't be fickle, he won't hurt me, and he won't rape me against my will. He won't have contact with other women when we're together. If we're not together, he'll tell me. Lan Yu, that's what I want. It's very simple. And you can't do it at all. She smiled. I tried, but you crossed my bottom line in just a few days. When he and that little celebrity were in the newspaper, they were in the hotel. But no matter what happened, he did it on purpose for her to see. She knew it too well. So, it was impossible. She had grass growing on her head, and she still wanted to keep this man for the new year. Lan Ding's face darkened. I won't divorce you. Whatever. If you think that marriage certificate means anything, just keep it for the new year. Qin Chen broke free from him and wanted to close the door. But she was caught by him again. He stared at her eyes. Whose son is Rongyu? Qin Chen was stunned for a moment, and then he sneered, you're crazy. He's Rong Lei's son. Really? I'll do a DNA test. Lan Yu's eyes were cold. If he's my son, I'll take him back even if I have to give up everything. Qin Chen gave him a backhand slap. Despicable. He stroked his face gently, but he sneered, does this slap mean that you're guilty? Is Rong Yu my son? Qin Chen raised his chin slightly. Rong Yu's surname is Rong. He will never be your son. Lan Yu, you disgust me. With that, she pushed him away forcefully and turned around to close the door. She pressed her back against the door, lowered her face, and covered her eyes with her hands. Pei Jingyu opened her eyes, sat up, and looked at her quietly. Did he bully you? He asked. Actually, he hadn't slept at all. His relationship with Qin Chen wasn't like that either. They were both working for Sister Quan, and they were like siblings. He had no place to stay when he returned to City H, so Qin Chen invited him to stay here. It was not until Lan Yu ran over that Pei Jingyu realized that he had been used as a weapon. He put on his slippers and sighed softly. Sister Chen, should I buy a huge amount of personal safety insurance or accident insurance now? With Lan Yu's ruthlessness, it wouldn't be strange if he took his life. Qin Chen walked to the bar counter to make coffee for herself. She was wearing a bathrobe, and her figure was very slender. The little puppy was familiar with her. At this time, he coughed lightly and ran over to hug her from behind. Sister Chen, have you really not considered me? Although my wealth isn't as good as Lan Yu's, I'm young and strong. Qin Chen was still making coffee, and her voice was indifferent. He can work for 5 or 6 hours a night without rest. Can you? The little puppy was frightened and immediately packed his things and left. When he was downstairs, he was blocked by Lan Yu. The young puppy was beaten into a national treasure. Chapter 30-44. Who said you could leave? Qin Chen chuckled, taking pleasure in his misfortune. Ruthless. Heartless. The puppy gritted his teeth but didn't dare to say anything. He was an artist of King Entertainment. If they wanted to promote him, they had to please him. You didn't tell me about our real relationship, did you? Qin Chen asked slowly after taking a sip of the coffee. The puppy felt wronged. I wouldn't dare. Will I be beaten to death? He asked with a hint of arrogance. It's hard to say. Qin Chen laughed. But I think you'll cooperate with me for the next show. Pei Jingyu gritted his teeth. I might as well climb into the CEO's bed. My brother isn't interested in men, and he's even less interested in transsexuals, Qin Chen told him kindly. The puppy lost his will to fight and calmed down. All right, I'll continue to serve you. But if he hits me again, I'll defend myself. Up to you. I didn't say you can't fight back, Qin Chen said coldly. Fuck, the puppy covered his eyes. Sister Chen, why didn't you say so earlier? I thought you felt sorry for him. He hung up and opened the car door to walk toward Lan Yu. He was a popular celebrity. Reporters had been following him and Qin Chen for a long time. Although they didn't get any actual photos this time, they managed to capture a fight between him and Qin Chen's ex-husband. It was explosive. So, not only did they both go to the hospital with swollen faces, they even made the headlines together. The reporters followed them to the hospital. Of course, Qin Chen also received a concerned call from Qin Mo. After interrogating his sister for a while, he gave an order. The company is now promoting Pei Jingyu. Go to the hospital to visit him now and hype up your scandal. Qin Chen frowned. I'm not divorced yet. Aren't you afraid of burning him? He won't. Qin Mo coughed. Remember to buy a bouquet of flowers. With that, he hung up the phone. Qin Chen stared at her phone. After putting it down, she quietly made herself a cup of coffee, changed her clothes, and went out. When she walked into the VIP ward of Xing Yuan with the red roses, the reporters were taking photos crazily outside. Because she entered Pei Jingyu's ward, not her future ex-husband Lan Yu's. Miss Qin, does this mean that you've chosen fresh meat? Miss Qin, are you willing to give up President Lan's assets worth hundreds of billions? Is Miss Qin and Pei Jinyu in a spiritual relationship, or have they made a breakthrough? The reporters chased after him relentlessly. Qin Chen turned his head and said expressionlessly, Jingyu and I are from the same company. Shouldn't I come to see him? Her gaze was sharp as she stared at the reporters. I don't want you to write nonsense, or I'll sue you and put you in jail. The reporters collectively gasped. They had never seen such an arrogant person. However, they went over to Lan Yu's side and conducted all kinds of interviews. It was like this: your future ex-wife went to another man's ward and didn't come to see you. Lan Yu's face was cold. Kevin, drive these reporters out. Kevin looked at his boss sympathetically and asked the security guards to drive the reporters out. Lan Yu lay on the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling. Suddenly, he asked quietly, Kevin, am I a failure? Am I very bad? That's why she retaliated against me like this. Chapter 30-45. Lan Yu looked at him with a miserable expression. Kevin coughed lightly. Actually, it's not that you're bad, boss. It's just that Miss Qin isn't an ordinary person, so you don't seem that outstanding. Lan Yu snorted and coughed lightly. What do you mean by not outstanding? Kevin was very kind. Boss, you're already in your 30s, early 30s. How can you still fight with these little fresh meats? It seems that his injuries are more serious than mine. Boss Lan said very honestly. Kevin sighed softly. The little fresh meats are injured on their bodies, but you're injured on your face. Think about it, when Miss Qin visits the little fresh meats, their faces are still pretty, but Boss Lan, you're a little miserable. Lan Yu glanced at him. Bring a mirror over. Kevin had to make a mirror and show it to Boss Lan. Lan Yu only took a glance at it before throwing it aside. He didn't want to look at it anymore. Kevin said kindly, the swelling will go down in a few days. It won't look like a pig's head anymore. His boss Lan glared at him. Kevin stood at the side and didn't say anything. On the other side of the ward, it was very lively. Qin Chen placed the flowers by Pei Jingyu's bedside and looked at him. Sister Qin Chen. Pei Jingyu sighed. I was beaten up like this because of you. Because of me. Qin Chen laughed and reached out to gently pull his black hair. Then I'll get a divorce and we'll get married, okay? Pei Jinyu's face turned green. Sister Qin Chen, this joke isn't funny at all. Pei Jinyu tugged at her sleeve. Qin Chen continued to say infuriatingly, weren't you fighting for me just now? Her fingers caressed Momo's good-looking face. Oh right, do you think Qin Mo would agree if I were to ask him to give you to me? Pei Jinyu's face darkened. Sister Qin Chen. The little fresh meats finally revealed the secret. I have a girlfriend. You have a girlfriend. Do you want me to dig it out and get the company to freeze you? Qin Chen threatened with a smile. Pei Jingyu finally relented. Okay, I will continue to pretend to be your boyfriend. Now he really wanted to cry. Why did he think that Qin Chen was easy to get along with? She was the black-bellied one. Qin Chen let go of his face and stood up with a smile. Remember to be more affectionate in front of the reporters, and don't be too direct. Be careful not to affect your future. If it weren't for the fact that Pei Jingyu couldn't move, he really wanted to slap Qin Chen to death. In the end, he could only glare at her hatefully. Chen bent down and kissed his forehead. Good boy. Suddenly, her hand was caught by him, and she was forcefully dragged towards him, knocking into his body. The little fresh meat's eyes were filled with aggression. Don't call me a kid. In fact, he was only 2 or 3 years younger than her. Chen's hand retracted. He didn't let go of her. Don't kiss me, or I'll take it seriously, he murmured. Chen came back to his senses and patted his face. Didn't you say that you have a girlfriend? Ex-girlfriend. Pei Jingyu said softly. Chen coldly snorted and slapped his face until it was swollen. Pei Jingyu lay on the bed and smiled. I'm serious, Chen. When you divorce him, we'll be together. Chen walked out. He tilted his head and smiled. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.